you have an
Okay,
opening statement?
I'll wing it.
Before
Wing it, go for
we
it.
start though, can everyone just give a brief introduction just so like chat knows who the voices are?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you. Give us time to plug our shit. Hi, I'm Posadist Pan. Despite my name, I am not actually Posadist. You can follow me on TikTok. Um, Much appreciated. I am kind of a Hayekian Austrian. I believe in some Austrian theories, such as the Austrian business cycle theory. I'm also utilitarian and empiricist. So it's not. I guess I'm not a traditional Austrian, but I do follow a lot of their beliefs more. Um, I've, you know, I'm a frequent member of these online Discord things, and don't really have any special credentials, but let's have fun today.
All right, so that was Posadis Pan. Moving on to Alex Pop 24.
Alright, what's up? My name's Alex. My TikTok is at the Serbian Voluntarist. I would call myself a Miesian/Hayekian Austrian. I'm I guess I'll say I'm a util. And I love Austrian economics, love debating it, and yeah.
All right, that was Alex Pop 24. Moving on to Indian Panini.
You all know who I am. My name's Indian Panini. I guess if you want my introduction to politics, I'm a socialist slash progressive. My best known name or my political views would more closely align with the name progressive. I do politics on TikTok. On TikTok, my name is @progressivepowerhouse. And in terms of Discord, I'm, of course, Indian Panini. But with that, let's get into it.
All right, so who's the opposition? Who's the affirmative?
For me,
We're
it's
the
kind of
affirmative, they're the opposition.
All right, so are we starting then as the affirmative?
Sure.
It'd be
They
helpful
can
if
start.
you guys. It'd be helpful if you guys started, since I think you guys have prepared opening statements. It would
Rose,
like
go
we
ahead.
don't even know what we're debating, so.
Don't worry, we haven't
Okay.
prepared opening
Go
statements.
ahead.
Okay, so we come here to debate capitalism versus socialism. And there are a number of points by which we believe that socialism is a superior, more moral system of organizing our business and other, the economic status quo, basically, than what capitalism is. There are three main points by which we support socialism as a concept. We believe that it has an improved ability of dealing with the negative externalities that are intrinsic to markets, because after all, we still advocate for a market socialist societies. We believe that worker cooperatives tend to be more effective and result in better outcomes when it comes to, empiricism and the financial outcomes of worker cooperatives compared to traditional firms. Then there is also the philosophical, more moral argument for why we believe in this. We believe that the divide between employer and employee is fundamentally unjust, and that it should be a thing that we should definitely do because it has positive effects such as making people happier, raising median wages, and then through the reduction of inequality, for example, there is a whole load of positive consequences to that trickle down. This is the only type of trickle-down economics I support now, but that trickle and spread across the economy as a whole as an effect of having reduced inequality and having a more spread out wealth base rather than having it be concentrated ever stronger in the hands of the top 1%. Panini.
So I think generally what Rose Riss said was quite eloquent and quite summarizing of our position. In terms of my own position, of course, we are taking the stance of market socialism, which is a form of socialism in which we fulfill two of the Marxian properties of socialism, one being the collective or worker ownership of the means of production, and two being the decommodification or the abolishment of the commodity form. We take the first stance as we believe it is more pragmatic to value the collective or worker ownership of the means of production instead of focusing on the decommodification of everything because, well, that's just a harder goal to meet. In terms of our ethical framework, we will take an ethical framework of utilitarianism. And we will also peel back the layers and show why a capitalist system, why capitalist firms, and why the capitalist mode of production is inevitably contradictory and will cease to exist as it is an unjust form of exploitation.
All right. Should we just go into contentions or just say some random bullshit to start us off?
We can say some random bullshit.
All right.
I guess. Do you want to go first, Alex, or me?
All right. So we are arguing for a free market capitalist system, as you know, with the with the freedom to start any type of business model you want. As we know, there's multiple forms of businesses. We agree that people should be able to voluntarily contract in any form of these businesses. We believe that overall the capitalist mode of production is more efficient than the other forms, and that a capitalist system will overall bring the highest amount of utility and happiness and standard of living towards everyone in society.
Yeah, basically what he said. The old saying, "Capitalism raises all boats." We believe that uh, genuinely, if two people want to realize that they will both benefit from an interaction, we think that they have every right to participate in that interaction, despite what some third party might call that interaction, whether they think it's improper or not. It's not up to them. We believe in freedom of choice and stuff like that. And yeah, while we as he said, we approve of any type of business models, including worker co-ops. There's nothing illegitimate about worker co-ops or even incompatible with worker co-ops and the free market.
All right.
Okay, if Rose wants to start with response there, he can.
Yeah. So the first thing I think we should do before we get into more depth of discussion is talk about, like the fundamental, I guess, like worldviews and difference in fundamental values that are going to play into this debate, right? Because if we just go to the more in depth things, we're going to jump over it and then we're going to get stuck. So when you say that, for example, you like, a society in which interactions happen voluntarily, fine, I agree with this. That's why I want to maximize like a person's ability to be able to make, informed, non-exploitative agreements with their fellow peers in the engagement to the economic sphere. Your analysis of this, in that if two parties agree that they want to do something, that should be okay regardless of what a third party would say, seems like it would lend, I guess, philosophical credence to a whole load of negative things, such as, for example, corruption, indentured servitude, child labor, and a bunch of other really negative things. And I would like to see how that, I guess,
Yeah,
is reflected within
here-
your piece of analysis.
yeah,
Well, as
and
a
here's the
utility, I guess. Oh, I
here's the
guess.
thing with like my bad.
No, you can
If you
go.
want to go. Okay.
Okay.
So the thing with voluntary interaction, right, is that in a perfect world, obviously voluntary interaction would occur and things would occur on a voluntary basis. It would be totally ethical and everything. But in the real world, where things happen on a very substantive basis and there are real world implications that are extremely complicated to actually perceive and to measure, to quantify, this idea of voluntary exchange is just not true. The fact is, people with more power, with more capital, with more ability to negotiate are going to have more of a stake at the table. They're going to be able to wage their bets in a better or more efficient way than the people at the bottom of the barrel. I mean, like a capitalist.
Yeah, I think
someone
we
who
should give
owns-
them some time to speak because we're laying out a lot of things.
okay.
Question. We're going to be debating in a free market, like a free market perspective. And problem with your contention is you first have to look at how wealth is created, how these businesses actually get their amounts of capital. Because the only way in a free society to get this mass amounts of wealth is to actually have the consumers the consumers and the labor being benefited from it simultaneously. Otherwise, no one's going to buy from that specific company. So in order to get to that point of high perspective, you
And
have to benefit everyone else.
I
Wait.
agree. I think that while people that are higher up, undeniably have some more power in the interactions, I still think that working class people like you or me, do have some leverage in that we're not going to interact with something unless it directly benefits us. If we take a look at this on any case by case basis and use induction from there, we can see, for example, like I- if even if things are bad for me, if a business provides me with an opportunity that leads me better off, I'm better off with that opportunity existing to me. Even if some third party calls it exploitative, I would be better taking that option than not taking that option, than I'm being helped. I don't think there's this. I don't think it's this zero sum game. I feel like you guys are kind of describing it as some sort of zero sum game, when I don't think it's zero sum at all. And I don't think that them having more leverage is inherently bad. And I think you need to go more into detail about why you think that people who are, at the bottom of the system can't, find trades that make them better off.
Okay, just a quick question here before we move on. So, in a situation where, let's say, a family that is doing poorly in terms of socioeconomic condition, in that family there's a child who's like 12 years old, okay? And then this child, I guess consensually by your definition, agrees to vote, like work at I don't know, like a factory or something in order to raise additional income for their family. Is that a just relationship and a consensual exchange that's taking place under your system?
Well, first of all, it's horrible, right? I don't think anyone wants little kids working in factories. Uh,
Well,
However, if it's true that they are on the verge of starvation and without this work in the factories, they, them and their families are going to starve, then I think the factory's existence, even though it's horrible, is, on a utilitarian basis, does benefit the family because
brings
if
more
the factories
benefits the
weren't
family
there in the
more.
first place, then they would have no option at all, right?
Ooh, wait. Okay, so this is, I think, this is a very perfect scenario that you've created. So this idea that from a utilitarian perspective, it's a good idea is just kind of philosophically like bunk in my opinion. And one of the biggest reasons why I don't think this analysis really plays out in reality is because while it might be true that providing that kid with the ability to go and feed his family is a good thing, what that can inevitably do is that can create a culture or a norm of families who are starving, putting their kids into these positions of ineptitude and work. And then inevitably, what this creates is this creates a working class population who is subservient to the higher ups within the company. And because of their financial status, because of the wages that they're being paid, they have no way to actually get up or rise up in social status. Because inevitably, I mean, what collective bargaining does the kid have in terms of the employer? The kid is just going to work for his family, work for a meager sum of money so they can feed themselves and their family. However, that meager sum of money is not going to be enough to propel that person to be able to make better social situations or make better individual choices within a capitalist system. Essentially, allowing people to have this voluntary exchange, allowing people to do whatever they want as long as it's voluntary, is a situation or is a philosophy
You cut
create
you cut out there.
you're cutting out a
You're
lot,
cutting out. You're
Panini.
cutting out.
basically all into monetary exchange.
I think your thing is broken, Panini.
Yeah. Um,
Oh
Okay.
my god.
I guess I would
Okay.
say if it's above, we can use induction
Oh
for this
wait,
process.
I have
If it's
I
above,
have a critique with it. Can
okay,
I speak this one?
go for it,
All
Jake.
right, so you're basically saying that since like, oh, this is gonna lead to an ultimate power structure. This has never historically manifested in terms of child labor being happening. Child labor in history, even with child labor being laws instituted, they most of the time didn't have an actual significant effect in reducing the amount of child labor. What actually reduced child labor in multiple societies was just the development of wealth, the development of industry, as we've seen in America. Before child labor laws, like most child labor was almost eradicated, and the child labor that was there was almost all on family farms. So
Yeah, if we
even
take
through
a
like capitalism, we can get rid of this child labor
Ooh.
happening.
yeah, if we take a look,
Wait, I'm
this
gonna need
does
a
seem to
heavy
be a
source
more
on that
transition.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm gonna
okay,
need a
sure, I
source
can
on that
I
one as
actually have
well.
a source on that.
That's like a really big claim that you just made, because in like the Gilded Age and like during the time of the Industrial Revolution, there was rampant child labor in industrial sectors, right? Because people who lived in these
Oh, I know that.
very urbanized communities, in order to pay for their rent or for food, they had to send their child to the factory in order to be able to pay for it. I mean, like it was a terrible time, and I don't understand, but because at that time, like the majority of America's land, America's like economic sectors were industrial; they weren't agricultural. So this idea that children were working on the farm and that was the only child labor that was taking
No,
place,
I'm no. I'm
quite
saying
Indian
ridiculous.
child labor.
Panini,
No,
if
no, no.
you'd like,
You're shaman me. You're shaman me.
I posted a table from the U.S. government of child labor from 1870 to 1930. You can look at it. It's in the sources. If a person on the stream wants to bring it up, this is the official data, and you'll see that he's actually correct. If we take a look at agricultural pursuits, the number of children working on the farm in 1930 is about 4.7. So most of those on family-owned farm, and about 1.6 worked of children living in industrial situations were working. So what we're saying is empirically true, and
Wait,
again, child
Wait,
labor
wait.
laws didn't come until the
Also,
late
wait.
also,
This isn't saying what
Panini,
you're.
Panini, Panini. You also
Sure.
shaman
Wait,
me.
hold on.
Well, again,
Wait. We need to go to the source. Okay, first of all, this
Yeah.
seems to me like, I don't know, I may be incorrect. Maybe I'm viewing this incorrectly, but this just seems to me like a census on how many children that are working within different sort of industries. But it doesn't say anything about the cause of the numbers going down.
Well,
I mean, it
we
doesn't
can
say
deduce
anything about
that. Well,
Yeah,
well,
of course
well,
it doesn't
you
say
look at-
anything
Yeah,
about the
but
cause of
you're
longevity.
making
It
the
would
argument that the cause is industrial development.
well,
well,
I
and
mean, what
wait,
if?
I'm
Hold up.
arguing
I
this.
guess,
So wait, when you
Alex.
okay, finish it.
I guess what I would say is, what do you think the cause is? The law against child labor didn't come until the late 1930s. What else would explain this rapid descent
Wait,
in child
there
labor
wasn't a rap.
participation?
Okay. So I don't think this
Wasn't
is
a rap.
exactly saying what you think it is. So, firstly, right, during the 1920s to 1930s, there obviously was a lot of economic anxiety and stuff. So you would expect at that time that there would be a lot of people who had to send their kids to the factory in order to pay for their bills, so that they could live a subsistence lifestyle during an economic crisis. Secondly, it seems to be that all of these sectors, male, female, and total, in all occupations or non agricultural pursuits, decreased from 1920 to 1930. What that suggests is, as a decrease in economic anxiety and turmoil, the people that were sending their kids to work at the factories didn't have to anymore because the economy was doing better. I don't think this is a result.
Okay.
That's literally what we're saying, though, right?
No, you're
What we're
not. You're
saying is
saying
that
that the
Okay.
once
reason.
the material conditions of the economy improve, parents no
Look.
longer have to send their kids to work in factories to
Yeah.
survive, and that's great. It's a transitionary period. We've seen this in countries around the world that are developing.
Wait,
China
Guys, hold on, hold
now
on.
has
I think we're
regulations.
gonna get stuck in the
It goes up
weeds
over time.
with this for a while, okay? So I think for this to be like an important point in this debate, and for this to be something that can be accepted by both sides, we would need a more like comprehensive citation with a source and academic analysis on the subject. But we can move on, because this wasn't even the main
Okay,
reason why
that's
we
fair.
brought up child labor. The main reason why we brought up
was
child
to
labor
show that
is to
volunteer
talk about
immigration.
is to talk about the relation, and like I guess what a consensual trade of resources is between two people. You guys didn't really talk about that as much as you said, well, it wouldn't have to happen during if capitalism
We're
was left
saying
to
it's going to get
develop.
phased out.
Yeah, like
When child labor is happening, it brings
they,
the highest utility towards the families, and
Okay.
eventually, as
Did
things
you
develop,
believe that it was a voluntary?
away.
It was a proper. It was a valid exchange of labor before. I guess the need wasn't met anymore. Did you believe it was a voluntary exchange of labor at that point in time?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Oh,
again,
you
no one
think it
here
was
is
voluntary?
defending child labor, but
Well,
yes,
sure, because the
objectively,
parents act as a
it
trustee
helped,
role to the
right?
children, and the parents are going to bring highest utility towards themselves and to the child themselves. Child labor has lifted like many people out of poverty in the world.
Yeah, also, I'd like to note for the audience that this is also an edge case. We're defending probably the worst type of voluntary
Yeah.
exchange in labor, child labor. So this isn't some middle ground where we're talking about, voluntary interaction. This is the absolute worst form of voluntary interaction, and it's still on net positive.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we can move on from this, I
I would.
suppose. Now that I mean,
Wait.
what are you gonna say, Benini?
I was gonna say that I'd like to see the utilitarian calculus behind you saying that it's a good interaction, because I'd say that the negative effects to society from child labor outweigh the meager benefits that a family gets from because utilitarian calculus isn't just based on a family unit, it's based on an entire society, on based what laws we should pass, how we should format an economy. It's not based on the individual family unit, what they feel might be better for them. It's based on the entire society. So I'd say that the societal impact of child labor and how that impacts industrial sectors and how people, stay in situations of poverty and decrepitness outweigh that meager benefit that the family is getting from the child labor.
Yeah,
Well, sure, but the point of one family maximum utility was an example of child labor being effective with people out of poverty. If we're looking at a macro scale on every single part of the sector, we can bring up the total amount of child labor relating to poverty levels. We can bring up the negative effects and stop fair trade has happened. Trying to stop child labor. We can bring up wage growth, real wage growth, and the decreasing child labor as already showed, and how it's on a big scale.
I feel like we can move on from the child labor now. The main part of that was just to
Okay.
get a gauge
Yeah,
of
that's fine.
what you would classify as a voluntary interaction. You guys
Sure,
seem to
yes.
classify
Yeah.
child labor as a voluntary interaction. I guess that'll
I mean,
make the rest of the conversation a little bit more difficult, but I think we can move on
it's
now to the
dependent,
general.
but again, there's obviously going to be extreme cases
I
where,
mean, even if it's an extreme case, it's still a case by which your ideology would allow for
generally
it.
though, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we can
Okay.
move on from that now. Now that we have a gauge of that, I guess it'll make the rest of it a lot more difficult. But what do you want to start with, Panini? when it comes to these arguments.
Yeah, so we can start with the idea of what is a voluntary action? What is involuntary interaction? What is an involuntary interaction? Now, voluntary versus involuntary normally rest on two basic principles. One, if someone is engaging in a voluntary interaction, they are acting out of their own free will. And two, there is no coercion present at the point of action. So let's get a
I
neat
guess.
definition of coercion.
Well, I don't believe in free will, so that's like kind of irrelevant to the point.
Well, then
A
how
Okay.
can you believe
voluntary
in
exchange
voluntary
is like
interaction if the
well, I'm
definition
a
of
self-determined
voluntary
Let
is
it
acting out of
finish.
one's free will?
I don't think this is too important to the debate, the free
Yeah,
will
it's not.
debate.
Well,
I
if
don't
you don't know
think
what a
it's that.
voluntary interaction is, then you can't say that you value
In
voluntary
my view, a
interactions.
voluntary interaction is two people like exchanging their own private property.
Okay, so
That is
if
a type of voluntary interaction that
or
isn't
labor,
a
not necessarily.
voluntary
Everyone
interaction.
doesn't have private property. It might be labor, for example. It might
Everyone
be
has
whatever.
private
Yeah,
property.
that's
You
not
are your own private
necessarily.
property.
Okay.
You
I
are
mean,
your
in
own
a way,
private property.
I feel like we can continue going on. I
Yeah, I
think
think so as well.
Panini
Yeah, this
should
is
continue.
gonna get into a self-ownership debate.
Okay.
Well, no. It's not necessarily a self-ownership debate. I'm just asking, how can you value voluntary interaction if you can't have voluntary interaction under your philosophical framework?
Yes, you can.
No, and by
What?
your definition, you can't, because voluntary
You
interaction
can't have
isn't just exchanging private property. It's a multitude of different things.
all exchanges are
That's
exchanges of private property. All free
all
exchange,
exchanges are
all voluntary
exchanges of
exchanges are
private
exchanges of
property.
private
Okay, it's.
property.
I think we can.
Wait,
move
okay,
on.
do you own a word?
You can't own words that are scarce. You don't own a word. It's an
Okay, so
exchange.
you
That's not
exchange
a
a word
physical
when you
exchange.
speak. Because when I speak a word, I'm speaking the word, you're hearing it. That's technically an exchange. That's not
I
exchanging private property.
feel like this tangent is really irrelevant to the overall discussion.
How? We're defining voluntary interaction, which is the basis of
Okay,
your
we'll
philosophical
continue to
framework.
define voluntary interaction.
Yeah,
You
so
were
the voluntary
talking about
interaction, and I'll define this for it's an action
Okay,
done, given, or acting.
Okay. Your microphone is cutting out. Okay, we fundamentally believe as like just like as a guiding principle that like the more equal the I guess sorry for the use of this term, but the more equal like the power level and the level of information, the level of I don't know like cognitive ability, the level of any number of things, the more equal these things are between the two parties, the more voluntary the exchange is. Because for example, let's say that you're in a very bad situation economically and you're offered a loan, okay, and this loan is completely awful. The interest rate is way too high, and it's basically a really bad loan. You might then have a higher need and a higher incentive to take that loan than if you were very well off. If you're very well off, then taking that loan would be a risk that you are not willing to take, because it fundamentally shifts the sort of like risk reward scales depending on your socioeconomic condition. There's different like levels by which an exchange may be voluntary and which levels by which an exchange may be, I guess, permitted and be seen as morally justified.
Okay,
Well,
well, the problem with that is interest rates in a free banking system. Interest rates will never go artificially higher.
Wait, one more. Can you slow down a little bit? You're going too fast. We gotta keep up.
So me and
Yeah,
Pan
you're
both
like
believe in
speaking
free
at
banking.
2,000 miles an hour.
So yeah, so me and Pan both believe in free banking. Oh, Pan, I don't know what banking stands for, like general idea. So the interest rate would be based on market levels. It wouldn't be artificially
This
higher.
has my example had
low.
nothing to do with like
Yeah,
this.
That has
It could
nothing to
be
do with the
anything. It
example.
could be
I don't
anything.
think so. What you call too high is the aggregation of several things, right? It's the aggregation of risk. People who are in lower economic situations are less likely to be able to pay back the principal first. Second of all, of course, interest has to account for inflation and it has to account for time preference. The fact that people prefer money now rather than later. So the reason that it's high isn't because capitalists are being greedy and
Wait,
want them.
okay, I'll provide I think we're getting
Yet
too caught up on the loan
they
bit
are at
because we're
more
going
risk
into
of
monetary
default.
policy now.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can use the best example that exists on this. Okay, we have two different situations. Okay, one of them you're a wealthy person. Okay, you're at a resort. Okay, and you go to one part of the island, and there's this random person there. Okay, they've stockpiled all the coconuts. Okay, and they're just sitting there and they wait for you to pull up, and then they tell you, okay, and then they tell you, hey, do you want these coconuts? We'll suck my dick. Okay, that's one situation. Second situation, you crash land, two people on a plane. I'm gonna go through this because you guys have already heard it. I'm gonna go through it quickly. The other person wakes up before you, claims all the coconuts, sits on them, tells them, hey, if you want the coconuts, you're gonna have to suck my dick. Which of these two interactions is more voluntary?
Well, I would say that voluntary is a Boolean rather than a scale. I don't think something can be more or less voluntary. It either is voluntary or it isn't. Again, people on your side of the aisle like to put these extreme edge case scenarios in which it seems pretty intuitively obvious for most people that it is coercion in these instances, like the plane crash thing. But again, these are extreme edge case scenarios that aren't representative of the real world.
But if
And
we're
I think that in that hypothetical scenario,
It's
I would just
not, but
say,
it's analogous.
yeah,
But
they can
no,
answer the question. They can answer the question.
in that hold on, I'll answer the question. In that hypothetical scenario, you have no reason to respect property rights. And because of that, there's no,
Wait, why not?
because you just landed on an island like in the middle of nowhere
But
and
that person put in
there's
the
no
necessary
rules.
labor and the time commitment in order to gather all those coconuts.
true.
Well, I mean, again, if it's putting another person like that in this extreme situation, of course the other person isn't going to suck your dick for coconuts. I
Okay,
think
I'll
that's
give you another
completely
extreme
opposite.
situation, Pan. How
Well,
about
all I'm
this?
saying is these extreme situations just obscure the actual argument. You try to take
No, it
the
doesn't
most
at
it
all.
does. You try to
Okay,
take the
No,
most
no,
okay.
no, no, no,
extreme
no.
We can put a more
scenario and
realistic
apply
example.
that in
Very easy.
general.
Very easy. Okay, you live
Yeah.
in a very small town. You have a poor socioeconomic condition. Your ability to move and go to a different place is very, very, very limited. Okay, in this small town, there is a business, an industry business. Okay, that's like all the business there is there, like realistically. And the conditions are awful, very bad. A lot of people die on the job. You know, they lose their fingers, whatever. A bunch of different bad things. Okay. Now another situation: a person lives in the middle of a very, very big city. Okay, and the same industry exists there with the same working conditions. However, there's a more availability of different types of different industries that they can also participate in and they can also work at. In which of these two situations does the average worker have more choice, and is the choice to like dedicate their labor to this bad industry more voluntary?
Again, voluntary is a boolean. I think they're both voluntary, but obviously we would say that the person living in the city has more choice and option and is overall better. I think that's why we need to make it easier for people to move like out of situation, get rid of regulations that make moving so expensive so that people living in these small towns can't leave. I think that's a major problem, the fact that they're basically stuck living where they are. If it sounds like a cop
Yeah.
out answer, I mean, it kind of is because I don't think the question is an honest one because I don't think you can just count out the option of, changing like obviously moving isn't hard, but we've seen
Oh
throughout
man.
history people worse off than they are now have migrated. Like if we take a look at
Yeah,
uh
but the
the Great
opportunity
Migration
cost of
and like we
Uh,
take a look at the Great
Oh wait,
Migration
I'm
with
back.
the
I'm
Pan,
back.
the
blacks in early
opportunity
America
cost
going
of
north.
moving is substantial. You know this, right?
Of
just
course it
move.
is.
Go
I'm not
ahead.
no one is saying
Yeah.
it's not,
So,
but your
well,
your
okay, then you're
discounting the option is
essentially
dishonest because like we've seen people
no,
in
it's
worse
not, and I'll
conditions
tell you
and they have
why,
it.
right?
Sure.
Well, Pan, you've essentially said that voluntarism or being a voluntary action is kind of a Boolean value, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But the problem is, when defining voluntary, we have to be very specific. And essentially, right, voluntary is something where there isn't coercion present at the action of exchange or however we're conducting this voluntary action. The fact is, coercion comes from threats or force. And as you said in the dick sucking example, obviously there is a threat being played there because someone is gatekeeping subsistence and saying you need to do something, you need to do something uncomfortable in order to get
To
or get the
survive.
means of subsistence, get food, get the coconuts, right? In a real world example, this is exactly played out in a capitalist system.
It's also
A capital.
the
Is it
No, it
different in
difference
is.
your
is
system?
self-imposed. The
No,
difference is
because
that
a
this
capitalist
is
is gatekeeping
imposed.
the means of subsistence behind a
Oh,
work.
okay.
That's
Wait, is it
literally what
different?
he's
Wait, I have a
doing.
question. I have a question for
I
you guys.
I would
Do you guys
disagree
think
with
it's different in market socialist?
Wait, hey, slow down.
Do you think
Do you
I
it's
guys think?
different in market socialism? The
Yeah.
difference is there are scales here. Because when it comes to the interaction between the person and the capitalist, the person is forced to work, but that work is not fulfilling to them. But
okay, well,
in a
I
market
think
socialist
a
system,
better thing. Yeah.
when they get to have control over their interactions within the company, they
Mm.
have the ability to engage in more fulfilling action at work.
Well,
It's
then I
not
want
this
to.
false dichotomy.
They are
I'd like to
Well,
represented
challenge
within the
no,
decisions that are made
the
within the
the
company
well,
in a way that they're not under traditional firms.
okay,
well,
well,
sure,
I'd
but
like
in
to
the
challenge the way it's you guys are kind of talking about this in this small town type scenario. Imagine they're living in a small town and they have this option of working for the, I guess you could call it the exploitative business that provides them the substance they need to survive. Now let's imagine a hypothetical alternative universe where that business doesn't exist and they live in the middle of nowhere and have no resources to help sustain their life. In which scenario is the individual better? I would say
Probably
that
the
the
one with the
individual.
business, but you know what would be a better one
Of
than with the
course, that's what
business?
we're saying.
Yeah, but better than that
So
would
it's
be if the
voluntary.
business was
They're
a worker
improving the
cooperative in which their
circumstances.
interests can be represented and they can vote for
Exactly.
having better working conditions.
Obviously, the coconut
We're not Amprims,
example is
okay?
less.
Well, I mean,
Obviously, the coconut example is
I don't
less ethical than
disagree with the
than
right to,
the
the
regular
right to
private
strike. I think
capitalist
that's
firm,
fine.
right?
Like I think there's nothing inherently wrong with collective bargaining. I think that that is another viable option. If you live in a town where, there's only one employer and, they basically employ everyone and you can strike, like that's a way of voluntarily, like I'm not against collective bargaining. Like that is a free market way as long as,
Okay. What if
there's
the
no
leaders
like
of the
force
business
involved, then
engages
it's
in
voluntary.
multiple means by which to limit your ability to freely organize? Like, what if they, for example, have they closely monitor all of their employees. They have programs where they encourage, I guess, the employees to snitch on each other in case they're talking about engaging in like labor unification. What if there are you just get fired if you're suspected of doing it, and there are very strong social and systematic barriers basically in between your ability to organize your labor.
I mean, again, it depends on this. In America, we have this system currently where uh, if labor unions have a lot of powers, they can mandate that employers hire from labor unions first. What you're talking about is basically yellow dog laws, which were kind of outlawed in like the early 20th century. So, uh, like hypothetically, yes, this is really bad. Um,
I mean, this is something
so
that this
long.
isn't a hypothetical. This
I mean,
happens in a
it's
lot of
kind of a
businesses.
hypothetical because right now unions are relatively strong.
Oh,
So,
oh, relatively to what?
Yeah,
I mean,
what?
relative to the government laws in place protecting unions are
In
str-
America?
Wait,
yes.
this is wrong on so many. But when it comes to historically, you're wrong. When it
What?
comes to contemporarily, to like countries in
Yeah.
Europe, you're wrong. There is no way in which unions are relatively strong in the United States of America today.
I mean,
What one
I guess
metric?
relative to what? I'm saying what are you guys talking
Well,
about
you made the
relative to?
statement. You said they were relatively
No, I'm
prominent.
talking about relative to the laws in place. There are more laws protecting unions than there are against against them. I
But that's
guess.
nothing to do when it comes to, like, if we're talking about how like prevalent they are and how powerful they are, the laws like have nothing to do. Like, what if you have like one law that's super good at preventing unions and like five that are like kind of sort of maybe incentivize unions? Are you going to say that there's more what? What you have to look
No,
at is
I'm
the outcomes, right? You don't look at
Yeah, you don't
the
look at like
the
the laws,
inputs.
you look at the outcomes. Yeah, or like unions are doing terribly right now in the United States.
I
There's no way by which
Union
the
membership
statements
is an all-time
unions are
low.
relative. Yeah, that was an
The
insane
That's
private
statement.
not
sector has
inherently bad though. If union
6.4% of
membership,
its
if union membership is at an all-time low because of voluntary interaction, I don't care.
But it's not because of voluntary action. That's what we just
it's not
stated.
Well,
because
what
yeah,
laws? What laws are we
exactly.
talking about here?
It
Do
can
we
be
have a
laws. It can be what
because
was there was what was the name of that?
because there are
Was it
laws.
like there
First of
was
all, there are
Glass
many
Steagall or
laws that I
something?
can cite that are on the books that exempt unions and give unions special privileges. If we talk about, take a look at the laws that exempt unions from antitrust laws, for example, if we take a look at the laws that basically make unions immune from civil suits, there's plenty of laws that strengthen the power of unions. I'd like to hear an example of what laws you think is uh, so, I guess,
Okay, I can give you a couple here, but I don't know
as
what this
strong.
has to do with the point. So there is I think the Glass Steagall legislation had some issues with unions. Then there was a bunch of
Yeah.
issues when it comes to company policy in specific. Like, have you seen how like dystopian, like like the way Amazon works basically and the way they handle unions? It's absolutely insane, and they practically have a monopoly on their their industry within their market. Like, I don't know how much time I want to spend arguing the fact that unions are like doing relatively poorly. This
Yeah.
seems like
And
just
I
a
mean,
complete
like, you've
waste of
say
time.
got
the
union
actual
busting as well.
Walmart,
To
yeah,
say
there's
that,
like
the legitimate, if we're talking about the legitimate function of unions to represent the interests of the workers and that the businesses agree to and stuff, because like if we take a look at all these laws, the strength of unions is arguably pretty strong.
uh,
Now, you might argue that currently
What?
you see less union participation than you would want in your ideal system, but that's not really up to you.
okay, I think we should just move on. I'll just like give the final
Do you
pieces
guys
of
want to go
analysis.
into the core of the creed, like the actual efficiency of worker co-ops?
One more time, can you start over?
Do you want to go to the actual core of the creed
Yeah,
and
that's
go
what I'm.
on to the actual what's better, co-ops or traditional business
Yeah,
model?
that's what I'm trying to move on to. So I'll just give our final piece of analysis. The statement unions are doing relatively well makes no
That
sense
is
historically,
completely
makes no sense
empirically false.
geographically, and makes no sense
Yeah.
domestically. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, we can
Yeah.
just move on
Again,
to a different topic.
as a counter, we can move on, but I would just like to remind the audience
I
that
mean,
I have provided specific evidence of laws that make unions relatively strong. They are exempt from antitrust suits. They are exempt from civil suits. They have lots of protections in. There are many states where unions are able to collect dues from non-union members. That like
okay,
the idea
fine.
that
Do you
they
want me
don't
to?
have any powers. You guys have produced almost zero legislative,
Do
empirical
you,
examples. So
do you
like
want? Do you want me
you
to?
like we can move on, but like
No, no, no.
you
Do
guys
you want
are
me to
saying that
provide
they're
those
against
laws?
law.
Because I can. I have a list of them right here. Or
I,
one of them specifically is the Taft-Hartley Act, which halted labor growth and enabled management to roll back labor's previous gains. It essentially basically crippled the growth of unions in America, and it promoted, very, very low union density in America, and it caused a huge drop in terms of union membership, the institutional environments in terms of the union environment, such as the presence of a Ghent system, where the unions were responsible for the distribution of employment insurance, have both been basically shown to give unions less bargaining power and correlate positively to lower rates of union density. They essentially have been cut dry in America for the past uh, basically century since the New Deal. And I mean, like there hasn't been a lot of collective bargaining laws. The laws that you're saying about the antitrust laws, those are all true, right? But those haven't led to a spike in union membership. They haven't led to a spike in union strength. They've only led to the corruption of unions and a decline in union membership as a result of these other acts that have been passed as well. I can give you some other ones too. You've got the Clayton
I'll
Act of
agree with you there.
1914. You've got the Landrum-Griffin Act of 1959. You've got Buckley v. Valeo in 1976. You've got the Wall Street crash in the early 1950s, and then you've got the Taft-Hartley Act, of course, in the 1947. I could name more, but I don't necessarily think I want to be naming every act from the past 60 years that has crippled unions.
yeah, and then there's
Okay.
like just general union
I
busting
understand
policies
a lot
from
of it.
every corporation ever. But I think it's time to move on from the union
Okay. Sure.
argument. All right, so I guess we can talk. How do we want to talk about what argument do we want to go to now?
Do you guys want to talk
Political
about
imperatives?
historic market socialist countries?
No.
Are you going to talk
But-
about Yugoslavia? Don't make this argument.
Do you want to talk about Yugoslavia?
Yeah, so the problem with Yugoslavia and comparing it to modern day market socialism or our model of market socialism is that it was extremely nationalized. The state controlled most of the most of the worker co-ops within the economy, and because of their bad practices in terms of their incompetent economic organization, they basically just printed money for most of their time in order to cover up their economic fallout. And then because of that printing of money, it led to hyperinflation. So you can't in any way, shape, or form empirically connect the introduction of a mandate of worker co-ops in their economy to a I don't know, hyperinflation or a monetary crash, because
wasn't
number
gonna
one, they
talk
weren't
about
worker co-ops, it
monetary.
was nationalized, and number
Do you
two,
not
it was
want-
because they printed
And
money.
also the
Hold on, do you
geopolitical
not want
situation
to-
is completely different.
have-
There's no
I-
way by which
Okay,
is
well,
like
I've got a question.
comparison
Do you
is
guys
valid.
not want to mandate worker co-ops? Because that I thought that was the whole point. I don't see
We
how you
do.
can mandate worker
What-
co-ops
that's-
without having national strength,
Well,
like control.
No,
them.
you
But
can't.
oh my God.
You can mandate worker co-ops without nationalizing them.
I know
yeah,
not. I'm not saying you're going to directly nationalize them, right? I'm saying that's going to have a similar effect. You're going to take a national
No.
body. You're going to mandate something.
No.
Okay.
No.
It's-
The
it's no-
difference
it's
here
very
is that
Just say no. That's fine.
Go ahead, Rose.
It's-
Go ahead, Rose.
Okay, it's very different. There's a bunch of different issues with this, like having like a policy that like similar name. I don't know how much that like lets you compare these
Yeah.
two societies completely. I don't know why we're even talking about Yugoslavia as a historical example when it comes to the economic situation, the geopolitical situation, the way the policies were passed, all completely different in so many ways to what me and Panini are arguing with. I don't
So you
know
want-
why
you
we're
want
trying to
different
railroad
Also,
us
models
into this.
originally, when the workers self-managed the markets and self-managed the worker co-ops, Yugoslavia had an economic boom. People were productive. People were happy with the way that they worked. But once they
yeah, but
nationalized the
unemployment
corporation,
was skyrocketing.
Look,
no, inflation
I think we can-
skyrocketed after the
Panini,
government
if-
printed
I'm
money in
asking
order to
hold on,
cover up
Panini,
the
if you
economic
want to
fallout.
if you want to say Yugoslavia is an example of worker co-ops and your example, that's fine. But you can't also at the
It
same
isn't
time
even
claim,
an
but also
example
it
of
caused
market
a boom.
socialism.
Okay, then
It's
let's
I
like
stick
know,
with
no,
that then.
I'm saying that that's fine. You can make that argument, and I actually don't know much about Yugoslavia, so maybe I
okay.
agree with you.
But this
However,
is
you can't also say that it's not an example of market socialism, but also it created an economic boom until the bad things happen.
well, that's just
You don't
because
get to
that's
make
just
both
Panini flexing
points.
his knowledge on the topic. Okay, I don't think it
Yeah,
has
I can
much to
send
do
you a
Well,
with
he's
it.
study
the one who
right
brought it
now.
up.
No, he isn't the one that
I
brought
can
it up.
send
Actually,
you a study on
it
it.
was
There's
your
an
teammate. It
analysis.
was your
Are you
teammate that
going
brought
to?
up Yugoslavia.
Nah,
He
I
said,
brought up
"Are you going
Yeah,
to?"
Yugoslavia
no.
because
You're the ones that
also I
brought
want
up
to bring out the negative
Yugoslavia.
employment about the thing, and I also argue that worker co-ops have significantly higher startup costs anyway in the first place. So I don't know what monetary system you guys believe in, but do you think that a higher startup costs would overall lead to a negative effect on inflation?
Wait, what did you say? One more time. My higher.
My bad.
Worker co-ops have a significantly higher
You're
startup costs
speaking too
than
quickly,
traditional
please.
businesses.
And like the mic quality
Oh,
isn't
they
that
have
great, so
higher
it's
startup costs?
They have significantly higher startup costs.
Generally that's not true. They just have higher barriers of entry due to the more difficult nature of starting a worker co-op because they're more difficult to manage. The way that we solve that though is that we employ basically an early risk-based system where up to a certain point, like a certain employee threshold, you can maintain a private business. But once you cross a certain employee threshold or you become bigger and the risk is more spread out among people, it's not as concentrated in the owner itself. You have to transition over into a worker co-op.
Okay, wait, let me
Okay,
find this source. I have too much stuff here.
I guess so. I guess something you were talking about is that worker co-ops are more productive than regular businesses, right?
yep.
Do you want me
And
to give you a source on that?
Hold on,
look,
let
I'm
me
not
finish
saying
this.
that's wrong. I genuinely I think that is an empirical test, and I think that if they are able to outcompete traditional business models on the free market, then that's fantastic. And if it leads to both economic growth and the betterment of working conditions, like I don't see why anyone would oppose that. However, having a small sample isn't enough to generalize that. We've seen there are very few worker co-ops to really draw on empirical examples. And if it's true that they are indeed more productive and better for the workers,
What?
then we will see over time the share of worker co-ops increase to the point where they take over the market.
Okay.
So I don't see why you would necessitate mandating these worker co-ops if they are indeed stronger than traditional businesses and will outcompete them.
Okay, there are a bunch of issues with this. So we can start off with I guess. Oh, where do we start with this? The low data, yeah, I agree. There's like generally low data on worker cooperatives. I agree, but the trends that are being distributed or being exhibited right now are very positive, and therefore I think it's an interesting idea that we definitely should go invest in. I don't think me or Panini advocates that right now we should just be like, hey, everything worker cooperatives. We should probably do just a little bit more research just so it's more comfortable, because just like capitalism during the feudal era, it's very difficult to make a transition just like overnight that works very well. So we want to do as much research and be as prepared as possible as we can towards that transition. Furthermore, the idea that just because something may be efficient within the free market, free market in heavy parenthesis there, or quotation marks,
Agreed.
it would rise immediately to the top is something I would absolutely not agree with. Just because an idea is good and just because an idea is effective doesn't mean it may outcompete all the other business. For example, there are very, very heavy powers of, for example, oligopolies and monopolies on very, very many markets. And they they very deliberately engage in predatory practices by which to remove basic, other types of competition within what's it called? Yeah, within their market, basically. And the longer time goes on, the longer capitalism is allowed to function as it is, the harder it will be for more and more egalitarian business structures to rise up, because it is in the working classes interest to make sure that they do not become popular and they do not become the status quo, basically. So that's I guess the point on why it might need to be mandated. And furthermore, I think the more fundamental part here, more than effectiveness, I think we need to go back to the philosophical part, because here's the thing. One of the arguments I often hear about, a counter-argument towards mandating worker co-ops, is that, well, under capitalism, you can choose if you want to have a socialist firm, but under socialism, you can't choose to have a capitalist firm. Yes, that's typically, that's how I would like a society to work, when we decide that one system is immoral and one is not immoral. And that's why we need to talk more about the morality thing. So, for example, you might say that, hey, slavery is immoral. When slavery was legal, you can just have a business that's not operating on slavery. But when slavery is illegal, you can't have slavery anymore. Like, it's just like, it's a very weird argument. We would have to go back to the morality of the issue more than the effectiveness, because when it comes to the effectiveness, we're not in a position to say so. And the fundamental thing is the morality.
Like, yeah, slavery was bad, but do you not think there's a difference between basically putting someone in chains and threatening them to work or you will personally kill them is different than, voluntarily soliciting people
Um,
to work for you?
Yes,
there
it's
is.
different, but they're still
There,
immoral.
Yeah, no. The thing here is that there's still there's still coercion in the voluntary interaction because the capitalist is basically telling the person, in order to feed oneself, in order to get a means of subsistence, you must work for me. You must till the fields. You must work in the factory. You must move a one piece of labor to the next. Like this is like a similar situation, not exactly identical, but it's a very similar situation because someone is still being coerced or threatened to work in order to fill their own means of subsistence. That's essentially
That's
what's being
basically
pushed.
saying, though, that nature is oppressing us. Like,
Yeah.
yes, we have to
Yeah,
work to
nature
get.
Is
can
nature
coerce you.
coercive?
Yeah, sure, but
Nature
that's why
can
we as a
coerce.
society should try to minimize coercion, right? Because we
It's not
love
really, yeah,
voluntary
it's not really
interactions.
nature. It's coercion, right? Like it's
I
it's
mean,
it's it's
I don't.
societal imposed coercion.
Okay, if your definition of coercion, like, I feel like we've had this discussion before,
We've
Panini,
had
but
this
if you're
discussion before, Pan.
yeah, we've
And
had this discussion
believe me,
before. We disagree on what coercion means.
well, no,
So,
no, no, Pan. The thing is, something is you're not nature isn't the thing that's coercing you. What's coercing you is society essentially gatekeeping your means of subsistence behind work. That's not natural. You don't go out into nature
Behind
as a
work under
primitive.
by which you're not
Yeah,
represented in the executive
the
structure.
Native Americans weren't like gatekeeping food behind work, right? Like that's not what
sure they were.
happened. Sure, you had to forage to get food, but that doesn't mean that there were food there and someone was telling you you have to work this many hours, otherwise you won't get the food. Like
I mean,
that's
there were in
that's
some
that's
cases. Indian
unique
tribes
to
were very
society.
diverse.
What did you say?
Like some cases, that's true. There were many agricultural Native American societies that did have scenarios like that. So, like, it again, it depends
Okay,
on
that's
the environment,
non
right?
sequitur.
If
That's a
you're in
non
a
sequitur.
foraging environment, like if you're in a foraging environment, right? Obviously, and you're in an environment where there's not basically abundant resources. Yeah, like obviously the first humans who were foraging and stuff and didn't have any shortages of food were able to basically do whatever we want. But now that that's, you know, not the case, of course it's going to involve some interaction with society in order to, get
Yeah,
subsistence. Because that's the
Mhm.
only
Pan. This
way we can
But
support
but and
subsistence for everyone.
But
Pan.
here's the thing,
Yep.
though. When it comes to like our participation, like society as a whole, right? What laws there are, how we are allowed to like speak to people, how we're allowed to, like walk, if we're allowed to walk around naked or not. Like a lot of like the major decisions that impact all of our, day-to-day lives takes place through like democracy, right? That's how our political structure works in general. And a lot of the reason why we have democracy
Yeah.
is because we base it on a principle that, okay, if you're going to be subject to the laws and the power of a certain institution, and they're going to somehow influence or coerce the ways in which you live your life, you should have an ability to influence that and to have some sort of a say in what goes on in that regard.
Can you wait a
We
second?
want to take that same principle and apply it to the labor market. We want that if you have to
Exactly.
engage in a type of activity, if you want to have regulations on how much you're paid, what your working conditions are, how many hours you work, you should have some say in those things just by principle of being forced to partake in those types of activities.
Yeah, before we
Well, I guess
continue,
I don't
yeah,
necessarily
wait.
agree with democracy in that sense. I'd call myself more of a liberal, where all laws should be what the majority believes, but not all things that the majority believes should be law, right? So I agree with you in the case that uh, anything that is law should be decided upon by the majority. I don't think that necessitates that everything that the majority wants can be decided by law, because again, we can take a look at historically. There's been tyranny of the majority over the minority. In fact, that's like slavery, for
Oh.
example. It's been a tyranny
Oh
of the
wait, guys,
majority.
can I
Like,
lose everything?
Majority. Okay,
I
so
Wait,
am not feeling too well. I'm coughing a lot, so I can't really speak that
so
well. So I'm gonna get someone to take my place.
oh no no
Is
no
that
no,
alright?
no. Wait. Are you gonna get praxeology to take your place?
No.
Wait,
oh, you don't need.
I don't know
You
if
don't
we
need
need
to take
someone to
your
take our
place.
place. We've been going for like almost an hour now. I think we
Yeah,
can.
we can.
It's
If you need to
okay.
head out, if you need to head out, Alex, that's fine. I can manage.
Oh, okay, fine.
Ah.
The thing is, right?
Jeez.
Like while I do, okay, this whole tyranny of the majority business, I don't necessarily like buy into because
He's
I
off
think
now. This is a
while
2v1. I don't know what's
democracy
happening.
does impose the will of the majority over the minority, the fact is that's going to happen in any system whatsoever. Like literally, any system is going to be one party, just like literally like putting its own ideas and principles.
You're cutting out again, Panini. You're cutting out.
Yeah.
Normal
Panini, we can't hear you. It's really bad.
Ah!
Okay, Posadis Pan, what were you gonna say?
Uh, I mean, I think basically I disagree with his argument that we haven't seen tyranny of the majority. I think that's what we
Okay,
see
if we go
throughout.
back, if you go back a little bit, okay,
Can you
what's
hear
your
me
what?
now?
Well, I don't think even even if we go back a little bit, like yeah, we
Do,
can hear
Can.
you now. But like I agree that
Okay.
like for example, there are a lot of things that I think democracy should like laws regarding, what is legal and what is not legal, I agree should definitely be determined by the majority
Mhm.
since, these laws are necessary for the functioning of a free society
Yep.
and that these laws, affect everyone equally and are basically general and vague and apply equally to everyone. So of course everyone should get a right to say on those laws.
So
However, I
why
don't
don't we
think that's
apply that to the business sector?
well, I think because I think that individual rights trump the will of like the majority. I think that, for example, I mean that's one of the reasons I think that stuff like slavery is wrong because I mean, obviously there's other ways to come to slavery is wrong. This isn't like some sort of
Wait, why
fucking
don't the individual rights of the majority of the workforce count?
Yeah,
there.
you're
I don't.
just saying
That's not a
you're
thing.
just
This
You
just
don't
sounds
have
like a
the
word salad
individual
to me.
rights of the
wait.
majority of
Yes, yeah, it is.
there's nothing
Individual
individual
rights
about it.
come from like
Do
you
you
know
guys
that
want?
like
We should talk about that. The idea that the working class is some homogenous group with like
No, that's what we're saying. They're
united
individuals, and they should
interests.
be
Like
represented as individuals in a democratic structure.
right, but I mean, if
exactly.
we're talking about this as like you can't say that the will of the working class because they have different fucking wills. They're individuals. The
Exactly, but
will
as you said before, very
They
very
should be able to
eloquently.
express
Wait,
those
hold on,
wills.
Panini. As you phrased before very eloquently, even though not every single working class person has the exact same interests, there are general predilections that working class people may have that very wealthy people may not have, for example, and that through the empowerment of those people and people's individual rights to express themselves in a democratic system, we are more likely to obtain an outcome that that applies to that the working class's needs because they're the majority, they're like a large group of people, and through their individual expressions they will be expressed in according to how much they participate in whatever structure it is that is coercing them.
I think this comes to a disagreement about what rights are. I'm mostly referring to negative rights, with some notable exceptions, such as the right to have a lawyer provided to you. Um, I think most rights are negative in that you have a prohibition from people doing stuff to you, but you don't have a right to other stuff, right? So the rights that you're seeming to talk about, I guess I wouldn't identify as rights and would disagree with your characterization of them as such.
Okay, well, if you like don't include like company company policy, how much you get paid for your labor and stuff like that as things that directly influence you, then I guess we've just
Of course
reached
I
like
do.
a dead end.
I
Well,
mean,
you have a say over that, right? You
some-
agree with how much you get paid. That's like
Well,
no, you don't agree
but no, you
paid. You
don't.
agree to get. You don't agree with that. You're get paid. You want.
Your Panini, your mic is like busted. Okay, I think it's a wrap. Okay, well, if like we have been talking for like an hour and we have become no more clear in the position. It just feels like
we
we
can
we,
get
we,
back
we
to the
address
basics
one fundamental understanding, we move on within that, and then we go back to another misunderstanding of like what free will is, and then we move on, and then it's like what consensus is,
Oh,
and then we
I
move on, and
actually
that's
do
what
believe in free
voluntarism
will.
is, and then it's what rights are. It just feels like
Yeah.
this is like it's gonna fractal
The thing
infinitely
is,
from this
right?
point.
Okay, well, I
Like,
guess if
like
we want to
Pan.
keep doing this, I guess we could go over what we think the fundamental, what do you
Well,
think the
no,
fundamental
because
disagreements that we're having
Pan.
are?
I think it's
No.
time for closing statements.
Okay, need time for closing statements. That's fine.
Well, okay. So I just have I can't wrap my head around how people think like this. It's a very reductive understanding of how like coercion and voluntary interaction works with one another. So like
This can be your
I
closing statement, by the way,
agree.
Panini.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree to like I can agree to do something not because I agree to do it, but because I am forced to do so in order to get something at the end. So like people who were forced into slavery didn't agree to get into slavery, right? But
Of
because of
course.
their position in life, right? Like they had to do that in order to get any kind of food, any kind of means of subsistence from the slave owner, right? In the same way, people who are working class, people who are in lower socioeconomic standings, don't have the ability to, get capital and start a business. They have to sell their labor in order to get something in the end. And while you might see that as voluntary, I see that as coercive because there is an innate threat, there is an implicit threat in that transaction that if I don't work, I will not be able to get food, I will not be able to have subsistence, and I will probably die. So instead of it being a slave owner shackling the slave and telling them to work or die, it is a capitalist gatekeeping the means of our subsistence, our food, our water, and our livelihoods behind the lock and key of work. And now I'll move this on to Rose if he has anything else.
Do you want to take it for now, Posadis, or should I take it and then you want to go off?
You can. I guess I can. I guess I'll just. I can
Alright,
go.
go for it.
So I guess I'd like to stress the fundamental difference here is that the slave owner literally imposed the threat onto the slavey, right? They put a gun up to their head. They were the reason that the slave's life was or the slave's life was in danger. The reason the slave's life was in danger was because they put a gun to their head and said, "I will kill you." That is completely different from the situation that Panini's describing, where people have to eat to survive, and the only way to get food is via working. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with selling your labor. In fact, I sell my labor. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I value the wages I get higher than I do the cost of labor, and I think that's great. And I think that, well, I don't think there's this inherently bad thing that you have to sell your labor to get, I guess, to get subsistence. There's other ways of doing it, but I prefer this way over hunting and foraging myself in a society where, you know, that's unrealistic. So I think that it provides a much better way, a much more efficient way for me personally to get the subsistence that I need than hunting and gathering. It's much easier for me to sell my labor than it is for me to, go out and fucking chuck spears around and hunt game and shit. So I guess I would like to stress the fundamental difference between the threat being imposed by the coercer and the threat being imposed by, I guess, an inanimate object such as nature, who does not have, nature is nature. You can't, it doesn't have any motive. There is no normative nature to nature. So I guess I would just like to stress that difference that I think is extremely important.
Alright,
Okay.
fair enough.
If Rose wants to end that off,
Yeah, I'll have the closing
you
statements.
can.
Yeah, I don't know why our positions keep getting conflated with those of anarcho-primitivists. I like society, I'm wearing glasses, okay, I'd rather not get killed by a big, orange blob running at me, and then I realize it's a tiger, but it's too late. I think society is pretty cool. I think industrialization probably has positive outcomes. I just want to optimize the ways in which we handle the situation and the ways by which we're represented in the society by which we live. So while our opposition may have drawn a very hard line between the type of oppression that takes place during slavery and the type of oppression that takes place today, when it comes to the consequential outcomes, there isn't much of a difference. I can understand why someone might have that take because it seems more, I guess, intuitive in the slavery example. But if you look at the final outcomes of a society by which that our opposition is prescribing, the outcomes are pretty much the same. Under slavery, if you do not give your labor to an exploitative system by which you have no say on the policies and the actions that are being imposed upon you, you will get shot by your slave owner. In today's society, if you do not subject yourself to the dictatorial control of a business owner and abide by their company policy, get as much in compensation as they decide is adequate for you, you will eventually die by, assuming there's no social programs, which I would assume the opposition doesn't like, you will die by slavery, you have nowhere to live, you get, tuberculosis, there's a million and one things that will kill you if you do not engage with this very, 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 exploitative system. So even though in one of them is more, I guess, intuitively obvious, because in one you get shot, and the second one you die because you are denied access to resources, the outcomes are still pretty much the same. And as for why we believe that, exactly, and then as for why we believe that capitalism is inherently exploitative, we believe in the principle that if there is coercion, because we love voluntarism, okay, we're big voluntarians here, if there is going to be some form of coercion enacted upon you, you should have a say in how that happens, in how strong this coercion is, how it's going to be imposed on you, and also what type of benefits you receive in the system from the system to compensate for these restrictions that are being imposed upon you. Beyond that, there's also a multitude of empirical benefits that come with a higher median wage, worker cooperatives being the main mode of production, and a bunch of other issues, like, for example, dealing with market externalities, issues like climate change that we didn't really get into. But yeah, and at the end of the day,
I think we
socialism.
probably agree on climate change. I'm okay with government interaction to
Yeah,
stop.
but I would have made the argument that market socialism inherently makes it easier to tackle climate change because it contras, lobbying and stuff like that. But anyway, it's beyond the discussion. So finally, we decide that capitalism as it exists today is an exploitative system. We believe in representation in systems that are exploiting you, or systems that you are participating in, that you put things in and you take things out. And we believe that the hard line between the exploitation of slavery and today, while there is absolutely significant differences that make them different, in the way by which that applies to this discussion, they're not so different at all. And with that, I think I want to end my closing statements. Thank you very much.
All right, yeah, thanks for having me. It's been an
No
interesting
problem.
discussion.
Yep. Bye bye.